From flooding the Krusty Krab to ruining recipes, SpongeBob's done it all. Here are the times Mr. Krabs should have said, "You're fired!" Yep, SpongeBob's had more chances than a video game on cheat mode, but sometimes the stuff he pulls would make any boss snap. And speaking of questionable decisions, let's see how he manages to turn even a job interview into chaos in Help Wanted. So our story begins with SpongeBob bouncing out of bed, more pumped for a minimum wage job interview than most people would be for the lottery. This guy's lifting stuffed animal weights, doing pre-interview stretches, and chanting his now iconic "I'm ready!" at the top of his lungs. That enthusiasm alone should have set off alarms, but it's pure SpongeBob and there's no reining it in. Patrick cheers him on from his rock, probably believing it's the dawn of a new Bikini Bottom hero. When SpongeBob finally arrives at the Krusty Krab, it's clear Squidward is already on high alert. He knows his new neighbor is about to bring a whole mess of unhinged energy into their world, and he's begging Mr. Krabs to steer clear of this potential fry cook disaster.
Permission to come aboard, Captain!
Krabs, of course, sees a kid filled with workhorse potential and decides to put him to the ultimate test. In the midst of this pandemonium, SpongeBob returns with, you guessed it, the hydrodynamic spatula.
Someone order a spatula!
And not only does he pass the test, he dives right into the deep end, flipping patties with the finesse of a culinary superhero. The entire Krusty Krab transforms into a surreal montage of SpongeBob saving the day, complete with Tiny Tim's "Livin' in the Sunlight, Lovin' in the Moonlight" blaring in the background. At this point, Mr. Krabs is dazzled. He's seeing dollar signs with every Krabby Patty that flies out of the kitchen. In his eyes, SpongeBob's a fry-cooking prodigy, a golden goose in a square shape. Against Squidward's protests, Mr. Krabs officially hires SpongeBob on the spot, ignoring the wild mess left in the wake of his whirlwind cooking spree. But hold on, just when you think SpongeBob might finally take it easy, Patrick strolls in to congratulate him and orders a single Krabby Patty. And what does SpongeBob do? He whips up an entire arsenal of patties, bombarding Patrick like he's the last customer on Earth. The kitchen devolves into another chaotic mess with patties flying everywhere. Squidward's eyes are practically rolling out of his head, and Mr. Krabs' face twists from admiration to horror as he watches his new hire lose all self-control. If Krabs was serious about professionalism, he should have fired SpongeBob on the spot. This kid showed a complete inability to understand the word moderation, and he left the kitchen looking like a war zone. But Mr. Krabs, seeing the potential to rake in profits, lets it all slide. And so begins the Krusty Krab's long journey with its most hilariously reckless employee, a fry cook whose boundless enthusiasm is matched only by his knack for turning every task into absolute bedlam. After that, you'd think Mr. Krabs would reconsider SpongeBob's role in the kitchen, but instead he lets him loose on an even bigger project. Welcome to the Krusty Towers. Turns out Krabs recently stayed at a swanky hotel and got hit with a $345 bill, a number that rocked his very soul. This is Krabs we're talking about. If he's spending a dime, it better be on something that'll make him $100 back. Naturally, this new hotel is a way to squeeze every penny from guests by catering to their every whim, no matter how ridiculous. He signs in, mistaking the register for a pop quiz he didn't study for, and starts requesting ridiculous things for Squidward to fetch, including bringing him a bubble bath. Every time Squidward reaches the bottom of the tower, Mr. Krabs sends him back up to meet Patrick's latest whim. Squidward's frustration grows to the point that he finally snaps, storms out of the Krusty Towers, and returns as a guest. Here's where things get truly wild. Squidward is ready to turn Mr. Krabs' own policy against him, racking up demand after demand. First, he requests to be carried to his top-floor room where he orders a gourmet Krabby Patty with all the fixings you'd expect from a revenge-fueled Squidward. Yes, including toenail clippings and nose hair, which somehow Mr. Krabs actually eats. If that wasn't twisted enough, Patrick, in all his Patrickness, insists on a room with cheese, leading to a cheesy disaster that manages to make things even messier. As Squidward's spree continues, he makes Mr. Krabs fetch cookies just like his mom makes, which requires an awkward trip to Mrs. Tentacles herself. After getting the cookies just right, he demands an endless list of room changes, only to revert them back to their original state, much to SpongeBob and Krabs' exasperation. Finally, Squidward's piece de resistance He wants the pool brought indoors. And against all reason and logic, Krabs obliges, transforming the Krusty Tower's lobby into a swimming pool.
Anything else stupid and unreasonable that you want?
Squidward, Patrick, and SpongeBob all dive in with glee, and inevitably the tower collapses under the strain, crumbling down and leaving only the original Krusty Krab standing in the wreckage. And where does this leave everyone? In the hospital, wrapped head to toe in bandages, with Mr. Krabs now facing a medical bill totaling $15,000, several times that little $345 that kicked off this entire ordeal. Krabs is livid about the expense and promptly scraps the hotel idea. He declares,
Pack your bags, boys! You're going to medical school!
And SpongeBob and Patrick, for some reason, are thrilled. If ever there was a time Mr. Krabs should have shown SpongeBob the door, it was right here, as the dust settled on the rubble of his failed hotel. Not only did SpongeBob follow silly orders to the letter, but he also enabled Squidward and Patrick's demands to the point of destroying the building and nearly bankrupting Mr. Krabs. But Mr. Krabs, always blinded by those dollar signs, overlooks the fact that his cheery fry cook will go to the ends of the earth to please anyone, even if it brings the entire Krusty Krab down with him. But hey, if nearly dismantling the Krusty Krab wasn't enough to get him fired, maybe imitation Krabs will be. This time, SpongeBob's obsession with keeping the Krabby Patty formula secure reaches a new level of, well, dedication. The episode begins with Plankton up to his usual antics, showing up the Krusty Krab with yet another harebrained plan to steal the Krabby Patty formula. This time, he's disguised as a pushy salesman, tempting SpongeBob with a cool $1,000,000 in exchange for the formula. SpongeBob shoots him down faster than you can say minimum wage. Just when Plankton starts losing his cool and threatens SpongeBob, Mr. Krabs intervenes and flings Plankton back to the chum bucket like a stray popcorn kernel. To hammer home the importance of formula security, Krabs lectures SpongeBob on keeping it safe. And that's all SpongeBob needs to become a total bloody formula fanatic, treating every vaguely formula-related comment like a national security threat. Of course, Plankton isn't done yet. He comes back, this time in his most ambitious disguise yet, Robot Krabs. His plan? Impersonate Mr. Krabs and trick SpongeBob into handing over the formula. Now, if Squidward can see through this ruse, you'd think SpongeBob might catch on. Instead, he's totally convinced that this janky mechanical Mr. Krabs, who has damn near toaster functions, is the real deal. And when the real Mr. Krabs keeps trying to call, Plankton distracts SpongeBob by, this is genius, throwing a penny across the room, knowing full well Krabs will chase it like it's the last penny on Earth. Honestly, for a guy who says he has no money, Mr. Krabs sure has endless energy for chasing down coins. Things get really ridiculous when Robot Krabs, trying to bond with SpongeBob to extract the formula, agrees to a secret handshake that is so convoluted it could double as an aerobic workout routine. For 6.5 hours, Robot Krabs goes through bizarre ritual after bizarre ritual with Plankton hanging on by a thread. After all that, SpongeBob finally shows him a bottle with the formula but refuses to give it up. Plankton is visibly losing his shit, but he manages to keep his robot act together just long enough to convince SpongeBob to hand over the bottle right as Mr. Krabs finally returns, penny in hand. Now we're at a true showdown. Real Mr. Krabs versus Robo Krabs. The two start bickering in front of SpongeBob, both claiming to be the real Krabs, and SpongeBob has had enough and brings out the tartar sauce.
Quiet! Until I know who the real Mr. Krabs is, nobody moves, nobody gets hurt.
Once again, SpongeBob's total gullibility nearly wrecks the business, all because he couldn't tell a guy wearing a talking oven from his real boss. If Mr. Krabs really wanted to secure the formula, maybe it's time he invested in an employee with a working radar for common sense. But let's be honest, would Mr. Krabs even recognize common sense if it hit him in the wallet? Enter Patty Caper, where his relentless cheapness leads straight to a whirlwind of disaster. Mr. Krabs is running low on his beloved secret ingredient, the one that allegedly makes his Krabby Patties irresistible. But rather than restock like a responsible business owner, he decides to send SpongeBob on a secret mission to pick it up from a SWAT truck. It's already more cloak and dagger than your average burger shop should be, but with Mr. Krabs, you know there's always more. SpongeBob receives the briefcase and can't resist peeking inside, but plot twist, the secret ingredient is missing, leaving nothing but a suspicious hole in the case as a clue. Enter Patrick, the sidekick SpongeBob didn't ask for but inevitably got. Together, they set off on a wild goose chase to hunt down the culprit behind this top-tier condiment heist. The first suspect? Plankton. Duh. Who else would want to have the Krabby Patty formula more than him? But instead of concocting an evil scheme, Plankton's apparently testing every ingredient under the sea in an attempt to crack the formula. Right now, he's on raw sewage. Lovely. Patrick threatens him with clackers because obviously that's gonna make him talk. Plankton assures them it wasn't him, though he wouldn't mind getting his hands on that mystery ingredient if he could. Next up is Sandy, who's allegedly hoarding patties for the winter. Who knew squirrels stockpile fast food? SpongeBob imagines a whole heist where Sandy goes invisible, freezes time, and lasers her way into the briefcase. Sandy, not in the mood for these accusations, shows SpongeBob her hefty order receipt and suggests they hit up his house for a more likely suspect. You can't make this up. When they get to SpongeBob's pineapple, Gary is on the list. Yes, his pet snail. SpongeBob dreams up a scenario where Gary helicoptered in, melted a hole in the briefcase, and snatched the ingredient in record time. Gary denies any knowledge, but mentions he saw someone with a black case around the Krusty Krab, which Patrick somehow interprets as a clear indication of Squidward. SpongeBob and Patrick make a beeline for Squidward's house. Squidward? Oh, he's got a black case, damn right. But it's full of tap shoes for his latest tap dancing contest, where he proudly placed third.
As you can see from my third place medallion.
He tells them to scram before literally moving his house to escape them. With 0 suspects left, SpongeBob reports back to Mr. Krabs.
Mr. Krabs, I don't know how, sir, but somebody stole the Krabby Patty secret ingredient.
Krabs' response? He goes full detective, accusing SpongeBob of pulling an elaborate switcheroo to frame himself, suggesting SpongeBob faked the pickup and sold the ingredient to Plankton. Just as SpongeBob is reeling, 2 police officers emerge from a barrel and witness Krabs waving the stolen ingredient around like a smoking gun. Realizing he's been caught red-clawed, Mr. Krabs admits he took the ingredient to avoid the steep $1.99 price tag. But Mr. Krabs, too cheap to pay and more than willing to let his best employee take the fall for it, now that's the real crime, and the cops aren't about to let him off easy. He's hauled off to court where Judge Trout dishes out a punishment that's practically Krabs' worst nightmare, giving away Krabby Patties for free. And to make sure he learns his lesson, they strap him to a chair, pry his eyes open, and force him to watch SpongeBob handing out patties like candy on Halloween, while Mr. Krabs screams in absolute horror. Yikes. The real takeaway? Mr. Krabs' obsession with profit doesn't just cloud his judgment, it wrecks it entirely. And if you thought Mr. Krabs' obsession with profit couldn't spiral further, Greasy Buffoons takes it to a whole new level, with SpongeBob's latest stunts leaving fireable offense in the dust. SpongeBob is taking a slip and slide on a puddle of grease that's pooled on the Krusty Krab floor. When he, Mr. Krabs, and Squidward inspect the source, they realize the grease trap is overflowing, looking like it hasn't seen a cleaning in, well, ever. Krabs delegates the cleanup task to 2 lucky employees, though volunteers would imply they had a choice. Squidward, as usual, nopes right out, vanishing faster than Krabs can scream no overtime, leaving SpongeBob and his boss to the dirty work. The next morning, Plankton, true to form, slips on the grease while taking out the trash. But once he gets a taste, he's struck by the greasy epiphany of the century: chummy patties with actual flavor. In a stroke of crappy genius, he starts selling these grease-soaked patties to a line of customers who, for some reason, are willing to wait outside the chum bucket. Krabs catches wind of this crap and freaks out, thinking Plankton somehow cracked the Krabby Patty's secret formula.
Clearly something crabby is going on here.
But Plankton's having the time of his life, chalking up his new success to a visit from the Flavor Fairy. Determined not to be outdone, Mr. Krabs instructs SpongeBob to get in on the grease game. SpongeBob, because who else would, doubles down on the grease, cooking patties so saturated they glisten like they've been dunked in oil. Because they have. Mr. Krabs markets these heart attacks on a plate as deluxe Krabby Patties, sparking a whole new wave of unhealthy competition. Plankton retaliates with his new chummy patties packed with quadruple grilled goodness. And before long, both places are locked in an all-out grease war, turning their food into dangerously greasy, barely edible sludge. Everyone's getting sick, slipping on grease, and somehow they still can't stop eating it. When SpongeBob sees his own best friend Patrick lumbering into the Krusty Krab, now obese and delirious for more crunchity-munchities, he realizes it's gone way too far.
Patrick! Oh no, not my best friend too!
Finally, snapping out of his bloody grease haze, he calls in the health inspector. And here's where things get really weird. Cue SpongeBob soaking up every last drop of grease like an oversized sponge, thus saving the Krusty Krab once again. But instead of gratitude, Mr. Krabs' final thought as he watches SpongeBob waddle away is, you guessed it, another scheme. And in the world of Bikini Bottom, who needs ethics when there's a quick buck to be made, like in the Krabby Chronicle? The next day, Mr. Krabs slaps a press badge on SpongeBob and dubs him the Krabby Chronicle's lead reporter. SpongeBob is bloody thrilled, armed with a camera, and eager to cover the city's hard-hitting news. He's out there watching a bank robbery and even a sewer monster rampage, but each story flies over his head. Instead, he zeroes in on the real scoop, Patrick standing by a bus pole watching it for any signs of movement. To SpongeBob, it's a quirky story. Patrick's just keeping an eye on a pole. To Mr. Krabs, though, this is nowhere near juicy enough. Duh. Now, this is where Mr. Krabs' vision for the Krabby Chronicle really starts to shine. So, instead of a cute slice-of-life story, Mr. Krabs spins it into a twisted headline, Patrick marries a pole. When SpongeBob hesitates, saying it feels dishonest, Mr. Krabs assures him they're just giving the people what they want. And that's the start of SpongeBob's slow descent into scandal-mongering as he reluctantly pens article after article, each wilder and more destructive than the last. We're talking complete reputation destruction. Mrs. Puff loses her job as a boating teacher, Larry gets banned from the gym, the Chum Bucket gets shut down. Desperate and done with the lies, SpongeBob decides to write a real headline about Mr. Krabs himself. When the new issue drops, Mr. Krabs walks into the Krusty Krab to find an angry mob storming his restaurant. It turns out SpongeBob spilled the tea on Mr. Krabs' greed, detailing how his boss forced him to write lies that ruined people's lives just for profit.
How could you do that to such an innocent child?
Sandy, Larry, Mrs. Puff, Plankton, and others join the mob, demanding their reputations and their money back. While SpongeBob may have cost Mr. Krabs a fortune, his bold move finally reveals the truth. And Krabs, he's left sobbing in the kitchen, clinging to $1, mourning his lost empire. But Mr. Krabs isn't one to be discouraged for long. Realizing his printer might be his ticket to recovering his earnings, he gets a grand, delusional idea. Why not print his own money? Just as he's getting started on this counterfeiting scheme, Patrick walks in with, who else? The bus pole he married because of the Chronicle story. He places an order for 2 Krabby Patties to celebrate his big day, leaving SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs in stunned silence as they watch Patrick gleefully dine with his inanimate bride. After the bizarre broomstick wedding reception, you'd think Bikini Bottom would have hit its chaos limit. But in Chum Fricassee, Squidward decides to spice things up at the Chum Bucket. So we start with Squidward in his usual routine, signing off from a soul-crushing day at the Krusty Krab, stuck working for a boss who can't be bloody bothered with things like a doormat or basic cleanliness. Squidward's rant about how he could start his own restaurant and have a packed house every night gets the predictable chuckle from Mr. Krabs, who sees his cynicism as Squidward's defining trait. Enter Plankton, who just happens to overhear Squidward's muttering and seizes the opportunity to turn his Chum Bucket from a desolate wasteland to a classy establishment. He latches onto Squidward with all the subtlety of a barnacle and convinces him to bring his culinary genius to the Chum Bucket. After a rough push from Krabs, Squidward finally agrees, quitting his job and walking into his new kingdom. Squidward, basking in his newfound fame, becomes the toast of Bikini Bottom, while the Krusty Krab is deserted like a shipwreck. Cue Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob, who, desperate to scope out the competition, sneak in disguised as fancy patrons. They even adopt new personas, Mr. Crumbled O'Rapper and his companion, to make it past Karen's reservation book. But Squidward, savoring his moment, spots them immediately and leads them to a VIP table in the bathroom. Watching Mr. Krabs get served up with a slice of humble pie, all while the other patrons laugh at his expense, is priceless. Squidward finally gets his revenge as Mr. Krabs leaves humiliated and defeated. But then, reality comes back to bite, literally. The demand for chum fricassee reaches an all-time high, and Squidward, drunk on his fame, decides to skip the 24-hour cooking process for a quick buck. Big mistake. As it turns out, Granny Tentacle's recipe comes with a warning: undercooked chum equals tummy troubles. When Granny herself appears, she declares,
Someone's been cooking my recipe, and they're doing it wrong!
Furiously pounding her cane on Squidward's foot, she lets him know the dire consequences of serving chum prematurely. Her wrath, along with a collective fury of customers suffering from chum-induced food poisoning, ignites an angry mob that brings Le Chum Bucket to its knees. Watching Squidward and Plankton's empire go up in flames feels oddly fitting, especially with Granny stomping out Squidward's ego one swollen foot at a time. And what's the cherry on top? Mr. Krabs swoops in to re-hire Squidward with a promotion as the Krusty Krab's new doormat. Yes, Squidward is literally stepped on by customers now, his fancy restaurant dreams trampled underfoot. So why does Spongebob deserve to be canned here? Well, if he hadn't been the one helping Squidward leave in a blaze of glory in the first place, maybe the Krusty Krab wouldn't have fallen into such sorry shape. With the Krusty Krab left in shambles, you'd expect a quieter shift. But instead, we dive into Band and Bikini Bottom, where SpongeBob's patty obsession causes so much chaos it nearly turns him and Mr. Krabs into jailbirds. The episode kicks off with SpongeBob belting out his latest Krabby Patty-themed tune in the kitchen with such bloody gusto that he practically blows Squidward and his carefully stacked cup pyramid across the room. Just like that, the restaurant is shut down after Krabs, in an off-screen altercation, threatens her with a French fry strainer and calls her a disgusting old prune. Bloody creative, if I dare say. Turns out her husband is Al, the police chief, so this ban has the force of law behind it. Meanwhile, Plankton initially thinks Mr. Krabs just went for a dramatic rebranding with the Closed Krab, but he quickly realizes this ban is his golden ticket. With the Krusty Krab out of business, it's his time to shine. Or so he thinks, until he finds out that Krabs has gone full speakeasy style, moving the entire Krabby Patty operation to SpongeBob's house. This bootleg Krusty Krab even has Patrick as a guard, who challenges Plankton for a password. In a perfect twist, the password turns out to be a string of Plankton's threats, letting him waltz right in.
What are you talking about, you gargantuan buffoon?
That's it!
As our spongy boy gets roped into running an underground Krabby Patty joint, his nerves skyrocket, worrying he'll end up in jail for his illegal burgers. But Krabs is all in, going so far as to threaten SpongeBob with the horror of taking weekends off if he doesn't get back to work. Just when things seem to be running smoothly, Plankton can't resist the temptation to rat them out to the cops. The police arrive in record time, ready to cart away the criminals and their illegal patties, but then Chief Al, the police chief, and Ms. Gristlepuss's husband, tastes a Krabby Patty and falls in love. Why is she Ms., by the way, when she has a damn husband? Ms. Gristlepuss tries to keep her resolve, but a stray Krabby Patty lands right in her mouth after she trips over her shoelaces. One bite, and she's instantly converted into a Krabby Patty fanatic. She calls off the ban, apologizes to the Krusty crew, and reopens the Krusty Krab, much to Plankton's dismay. The icing on the cake? Plankton's attempt to sabotage Krabs yet again ends with him literally being eaten by Ms. Gristlepuss, who accidentally chomps him down in a final Krabby Patty bite. The end card appears with a gulp, sending Plankton's hopes of outlasting the Krusty Krab down the hatch. Let's face it, running an illegal restaurant operation from your house, dragging Patrick into it as security, and nervously serving patties under police radar aren't exactly the hallmarks of an ideal employee. So, after barely dodging jail time with his underground patty scheme, a seemingly innocent company picnic that quickly spirals into condiment warfare and robotic madness in Company Picnic. The episode kicks off with a slow day at the Krusty Krab, where SpongeBob decides to liven things up by playing with patty meat and other ingredients on the grill. In his mind, these Krabby Patties come to life, becoming little burger buddies. But in the real world, things aren't going so smoothly. SpongeBob launches a pickle straight into Squidward's eye, making him accidentally squirt hot sauce in there. Mr. Krabs rushes over to douse Squidward's burning eye as well as the grill, which now has abandoned patties smoldering away. SpongeBob explains he's only trying to give the patties a little picnic, and suddenly Mr. Krabs gets dollar signs in his eyes. An employee bonding picnic? That might just boost productivity without costing a dime! Meanwhile, Plankton's lurking outside, eavesdropping through a window. When he hears Mr. Krabs' picnic idea, Plankton decides to throw his own, hoping he can one-up Mr. Krabs and finally steal that secret formula by winning over the crew. So off they go to the picnic. Mr. Krabs, true to his cheapskate nature, skimps on everything. He's got basic crackers instead of snacks and plays a cringy little fun game which just makes Squidward want to be anywhere else. The poor dude's trapped in a company morale nightmare while Mr. Krabs is running himself ragged trying to force team spirit. Plankton, watching this damn train wreck from his spot behind a tree, decides this is his moment to swoop in with a lavish picnic of his own. Plankton's picnic is suspiciously perfect. It's got fun games, delicious food, and a luxurious setup. Squidward and Mr. Krabs can't resist. They abandon their own sad picnic and head over, completely unaware they're walking right into Plankton's trap. SpongeBob tries to stop them, screeching, "Mr. Krabs, don't sign it!" accidentally flinging the candy pen that Plankton needs to seal the deal on a contract that would make Mr. Krabs his employee. SpongeBob's attempts at rescuing his boss lead him to a robot where he realizes that everything around them, every game, every table, even the food, is just a bloody hologram. Realizing Mr. Krabs is about to sign away his business to his worst enemy, SpongeBob leaps into action. In the ensuing chaos, Plankton is launched into a plate of mustard, which propels him into the air before he explodes in a rather anticlimactic ending to his picnic scheme. Mr. Krabs begrudgingly thanks SpongeBob for his intervention and admits this might just be the greatest company picnic ever, complete with rainbows, jellyfish, and seahorses drifting into view as if on cue. But as always, the honeymoon moment doesn't last. Mr. Krabs orders everyone back to work, and poor Squidward gets stung by a jellyfish on his way back to the Krusty Krab. The episode fades out with him lamenting his fate, and we're left wondering yet again why SpongeBob isn't on thin ice for his constant distractions and near catastrophic mishaps. Sure, SpongeBob saved the day in the end, but if it weren't for him, there wouldn't have been a plankton picnic crisis in the first place. If loyalty is what Mr. Krabs wants, then he's got it in SpongeBob. But competence? That might be pushing it in the SpongeBob You're Fired. Alright, we kick off this chaotic episode with our boy SpongeBob happily whipping up Krabby Patties like it's just another day of the Krusty Krab. Meanwhile, Squidward doing what he does best, absolutely nothing. But here comes Mr. Krabs looking as anxious as a crab during lobster season. And why? Because he's about to fire SpongeBob. Yep, Mr. Krabs found out he could save a whole nickel by cutting SpongeBob's salary completely.
Well, actually, SpongeBob, there's two words. And they're not very good. You're fired.
Harsh, Krabs, harsh. Here's the logic. Why pay your star employee when you can pocket the change instead? Our spongy boy is absolutely devastated, crying harder than a busted fire hydrant. He even offers to work for free, but Krabs, having already crunched the numbers, tells him he legally can't do that because apparently even he has to follow some rules. So, Squidward escorts the sobbing sponge right out of the Krusty Krab, mocking him the entire time.
It just won't be the same around here without you. You'll have to visit sometime.
And just when you think it couldn't get any sadder, Squidward tells him to come back as a customer. Oof, talk about kicking a sponge when he's down. SpongeBob goes home, a broken sponge, and Gary's there like, yo, you good? But the pity party gets a guest appearance from Patrick, who somehow thinks that unemployment is the best thing ever. He decides to teach SpongeBob the so-called joys of being jobless. Enter the 3 steps of fun employment, according to Patrick. Breakfast with Squidward, which involves trampling his garden, a mid-morning nap on Patrick's Rock, and a free lunch, aka mooching off of Sandy. The dynamic duo heads to Sandy's tree dome where she's conducting some kind of bizarre toxic waste experiment disguised as a free buffet. Patrick grows a second head from eating her mystery slop, but when SpongeBob tries to join in, Sandy stops him, saying he needs a real job, not a freeloading lifestyle. Inspired, SpongeBob decides it's time to get back on the grind. Patrick's second head throws in a sarcastic comment, and in true best friend fashion, Patrick slaps it for insulting SpongeBob's newfound ambition. Next up, it's a job hunting montage, but with SpongeBob, it's never that simple. He heads over to the Weenie Hut and immediately starts making Krabby Patties instead of hot dogs, earning him a swift firing from Mr. Wiener. At the pizza pie hole, he makes a pizza patty instead of a regular pie, fired again. Taco sombrero, burrito patty. Senor Tacos not having it, and once again, SpongeBob gets the boot. He even tries his luck at the wet noodle, but let's just say noodle patties are a no-go too. Every time, it's the same story. SpongeBob can't break his Krabby Patty habit, and it costs him every job. SpongeBob finally drags his sorry self back home, more depressed than ever, only to find Gary still waiting for food. In a moment of desperation, he whips up some homemade snail food that turns out to be a hit with everyone. Cue the random arrival of SpongeBob's former bosses. They've apparently realized they messed up and want him back, but Mr. Wiener literally kidnaps SpongeBob with a hot dog bun. Pizza Pete shows up too, and it quickly turns into a full-blown tug-of-war over our favorite fry cook. Then comes the unexpected hero of the hour, a giant Krabby Patty, which turns out to be Squidward in disguise. He's here to rescue SpongeBob from this absolute circus, not because he's suddenly a good friend, but because Mr. Krabs' cooking is so bad it's driving away all the customers. Krabs has no choice but to rehire SpongeBob, practically begging him to come back. SpongeBob, of course, is thrilled. He cleans up the Krusty Krab like it's a VIP grand reopening, and even outfits Krabs and Squidward in fresh new suits. But because Krabs is still Krabs, he immediately installs a pay toilet to make up for the lost nickel. And there you have it, the happy ending we all knew was coming, but also a reminder that Mr. Krabs' greed nearly ruined everything, again. So yeah, maybe firing SpongeBob wasn't the brightest idea. Sure gave us a wild ride. But hey, I'm just a guy who likes cartoons. Catch you in the next video.